All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Hopefully, you guys are starting to tune in for our hopefully missed live kelp cam segment. So we're super excited to welcome back our kelp forest camera, giving us a live feed of our kelp forest exhibit at Birch Aquarium. So we're really excited to talk today. My name is Delaney and I work in education, and I've been on a few of these before. So for those of you returning, hopefully nice to engage with you again. If you choose to make any comments or questions at our talk today. And thank you to those of you who are new and are joining us. Today we do have a really special guest. And that is Nusrat, and she is our volunteer manager. So welcome, Nusrat, and thanks for joining today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, do you want to quickly just tell us a little bit about your role at the aquarium and what a normal day looks like for you?
Sure. So as the volunteer manager, my job is really to, from the start of a volunteer's experience with us, help with recruiting and screening, but also training and making sure that volunteers have everything that they need to do the best job they possibly can. And if you've visited the aquarium before, you might have seen people in blue shirts, and chances are those are volunteers who are either greeting you and welcoming you, or at the tide pools, answering your questions, telling you about tide pool animals. And so a lot of my job has to do with supporting volunteers on the floor actively in some of those kinds of things, like if we're having a really busy day, but also a lot behind the scenes with paperwork and training materials and answering emails and phone calls and answering questions and making sure that volunteers have the information and resources and tools that they need so that they can have a really great experience, but also in turn that our guests can have the best experience possible.
Yeah, Nusrat, you have a really important job at the aquarium that's multifaceted, and you get to engage and work with a lot of different people. And Nusrat and I actually share an office at work. So of course we're working from home. So this is the closest we've been able to be on the kelp cam together. So it's kind of a nice to our normal working space at the aquarium. So nice to have you on.
It's really fun to see you this way.
Yeah.
And see the kelp cam back up.
I know. And so you might be wondering where our kelp cam has been. Well, we've definitely been, from education, been wanting to try some new chats with all of you and engage you in different ways in the science field. But a lot of you know that we just had a recent red tide event with the gorgeous bioluminescent organisms. And because our aquarium is an open water system, which means we get fresh seawater right off of the coast, that means that with that comes in anything that is going to be happening off our coast. So that included all of those bioluminescent organisms and all of the events that sort of followed. So for a while, our kelp cam was down because our husbandry team was making sure our water quality was good and healthy in our kelp forest exhibit, and our animals were doing okay. Because as you can imagine, a big red tide event like that can upset an ecosystem pretty quickly. So it was down for a while, but it's back up. And we wanted to welcome Nusrat because she has a lot of insider information, because she is a part of the team that trains and leads our volunteers during our normal operating hours at the aquarium for our kelp shows that usually happen. So Nusrat, we're looking to you to give us some good insider info and talk to us about some of these animals and some of the fun stories you might have.
Sounds great.
So those of you, as you guys are joining in, if you've got questions, it can be about our volunteer program. It can be a question for Nusrat or myself, or if you have questions about the animals in our kelp forest exhibit, feel free to leave them in the comments section. And again, we're really excited to have a lot of you joining us today. So Nusrat, I guess we'll kind of start off and telling us just a little bit about what's your favorite animal in the kelp forest exhibit.
So there are so many really interesting animals in our exhibit. One of my favorites is one that you can pick out pretty easily, even probably from your screen view, and that's the Garibaldi. It's really noticeable because it's a bright orange color. A fun fact about the Garibaldi, which a lot of our viewers probably know, is that it's our California state marine fish. And it has some really fun sorts of behaviors that you can observe that help you learn about how they live and pass on their genes and protect themselves. And so down at the bottom right of your screen, you can see one individual Garibaldi who seems to be hanging out in that sort of block of area. And I know just from learning about it that it's kind of maintaining and keeping that area clean, the algae all neat and tidy, because its fondest dream, if I can anthropomorphize briefly here, is to have a female Garibaldi come by and lay some eggs there so that the male can go ahead and fertilize the eggs and pass on its genes. And so it's kind of, making sure it's all neat and tidy and clear of debris. But it also will defend its territory pretty boldly. And one of the funny things that I've seen, which I can tell you about later too, but one of the funny things is that it doesn't really discriminate about who it wants to match up against to defend its little area. So that's kind of one of the, it can be kind of fun to watch. So that's one of my favorite animals in the kelp forest exhibit.
Yeah, the Garibaldi is very tenacious and has a big personality. And for those of you tuning in, it's a really easy fish to spot from our kelp cam, like Nusrat said. It's the bright orange fish that are going to be near the bottom. And before we even got on and joined all of you, we actually talked about kind of a fun story. And Christopher has a question for us, which is, what is the craziest thing you've seen a specimen do in the enclosure? Maybe
well, that's a great segue to what I was talking to you about earlier. And probably within the last couple of years, I was helping with an evening event. We do a lot of events where a client will rent the space and have a caterer come, and they would have like a really nice event with us. And so I was supporting, there were a lot of people expected. And so I happened to be in the kelp forest exhibit area, and a guest was asking questions, and I was talking about the Garibaldi. And just as I was saying that the Garibaldi will go ahead and defend its little territory, and it doesn't matter what size the animal is, the giant sea bass actually was down in the lower area. Normally, where you can see it hanging out up top is where it usually is, but it will from time to time come down to explore or get food. And just as I was talking about this sort of behavior of the Garibaldi, that giant sea bass was down in its space, and the Garibaldi kind of went wild and was just really offended that the giant sea bass was getting close to its little area. And in fact, it was able to successfully chase that giant sea bass away. And she weighs about 300 pounds. So it's kind of a fun thing to see when it happens in real life.
Oh yeah, I can imagine that tiny fish chasing away a giant sea bass. They're very territorial. So that's the funny story. That's one of, I'm sure, many funny stories and interactions we observe with these animals, because Nusrat can attest to this. This is a huge exhibit. It's one of our largest exhibits at the aquarium. It's 70,000 gallons of water. And we have many, many species in here. Over 200 individual animals are in this kelp exhibit. So you can imagine that that's a huge take on for our aquarist, our husbandry team, to make sure that, if those interactions or behaviors happen, they're keeping an eye on those things. They're recording those behaviors. They're making sure everyone's getting fed. And that's a really important part of that job. So Nusrat, a big part of the thing that you do at the aquarium is supporting our normal kelp shows. So what does a normal kelp show with our divers look like? And what is the purpose of that kelp show? Like, what is our husbandry team normally doing?
Yeah. So, if someone has visited the aquarium and had the privilege of stopping in when a dive show is happening, you would have seen what's happening on your side, on the dry side, we call it. And behind the scenes, there are a few departments who are working together to make sure all of that goes smoothly. We have our aquarists, who are staff that look after all the animals. They're behind the scenes coordinating a lot of the activity that has to do with the diving and the safety aspects of all of that. And then we also have visitor services staff that are supporting with the flow of people and guests through the space and making sure that everybody's safe and we have the right number of people, in the space that has a limited capacity. We also have volunteers out in the entry area who are making sure they're letting guests know you know, if it's full, what other option they have. And then we have volunteers. So we have volunteers who would narrate the show. So they're on the dry side as well with the audience on the mic. And for 20 minutes, they're going to take the audience through the process of what's going on in the exhibit, which will be kind of cleaned and maintained. The divers who go in the tank are most of the time volunteers. And some of them have been with us for a really long time, 15 and 20 years sometimes. So the divers have some really special training to be able to go in our exhibit. And there are usually 2 divers that go in, and one person is going to be on a mic so that they can talk to the audience later on and answer questions. And then one diver also has the really important job of doing the housekeeping. They're going to be removing debris and stuff that we don't want in the tank, waste and so forth. And then they're also keeping an eye and checking in on the animals, making sure everyone is doing well and noticing whatever might be different and new, like collecting eggs. Sometimes our sharks lay eggs in the exhibit and they get to find them and maybe even hold them up and have people be able to see them. So there's a lot that goes on in the exhibit. And one of the main purposes of the divers going in there is to feed the animals.
Yeah, which can be really fun to see because you see some of those animals start to interact with the divers, like the giant sea bass, even the moray eels. Sometimes will swim around the kelp. And look, a great shot now of the sea bass kind of swimming. Yeah. That's her spot. That's what she does. She hangs out at the top there, kind of to set her dominance over the tank. But there's a lot of different species of fish in here. And going back to the Garibaldi, we were talking about it earlier. Karen had a question. If the Garibaldi fish is still protected, is no fishing allowed? So Nusrat, is it protected still?
That's a great question. Since all of the animals that are in our exhibit are local animals, one thing that I know about is that right off our shores is a big area called a marine protected area. And so any animals or really anything that's within the boundaries of the marine protected area is protected. And there are some really strict rules about what happens. And Delaney, you might want to add more detail to that.
Yeah, you know, that marine protected area is really important for fish like the Garibaldi, which is the California marine state fish. So it is protected under those regulations because it sort of creates this sanctuary for animals to sort of live at peace. You know, it creates nurseries for small fish fry, which we call baby fish. It allows animals to not be impacted by fishing or hunting. And of course, even things like recreational sporting is regulated sometimes in those areas. You know, you have to have licenses or you have to make sure you're abiding by certain rules in order to enter into this marine park. You know, we talk a lot about marine protected areas in our kelp dive shows and with our guests, and with kids, a really nice way to compare it is if you've been to a national park on land. You know, you think about, you know, what do you want to bring to that park and what do you want to make sure you're not bringing out with you? You know, you kind of want to go in and make sure you don't leave anything that wasn't there to begin with. And you want to make sure you're not disrupting the animals, the habitat, the ecosystem as a whole. And you really want to protect it. So the same applies to this underwater sort of park. And the kelp forest is a part of that marine protected area. Like you said, Nusrat, it's one of many habitats that are right off of our shore. So definitely the Garibaldi, I know I've seen it snorkeling off the shore there, and I'm sure many volunteers who are divers have stories of Garibaldis right off of the coast in front of Birch Aquarium, which is a big marine protected area. So definitely. So it looks like we've got some questions about the divers. So this is from Omar. Do the eels ever bite the divers? Have you ever observed that happening before?
So, you know, we try our best to make sure we're avoiding any situations that might be dangerous for anyone, whether it's the animals or the divers, of course. And we definitely don't want something untoward to happen when there's like a live audience there, of course. We don't want to scare anyone. So the divers do wear, you know, they have their suits on, and they also are wearing gloves. So the most I've ever seen happen, the most dramatic thing is the eels who get really excited when it's feeding time. And for, you know, they don't have really great eyesight. And so they tend to go face first into the feeding bucket. And as they're doing that, they can't tell the difference between fish and a diver's finger in that moment. But I've seen an eel sort of grab the glove by mistake, and the glove come off. But there was nothing terrible happened. Nobody was hurt. But that's the most dramatic thing I've seen with an eel. But yeah, they have razor sharp teeth that are kind of angled inwards. So for it's designed with the specific purpose of being able to be effective predators.
Yeah, they have really interesting mouths, and in an exhibit like this, you have to get really specialized training in order to dive with animals like this. So even if you are a basic underwater diver or open water diver, you have to go beyond that and have to get a scientific diving license. So in those courses, they teach you, how to handle scientific equipment underwater, what to do in a stressful situation, and how to respect and maintain that distance with animals as well. So of course these animals get curious, but they're used to seeing the divers, and they know that that's the time when they're going to get fed. So usually they're more worried about the food than the divers themselves. But looks like we've got another great question here from Lisa, which is, what type of kelp is that?
That's a great question, Lisa. So the algae that you're seeing in this exhibit, there are a few different kinds of algae, but the main exhibit there is the giant kelp. And the scientific name of giant kelp, which I've heard volunteers talking about during their shows, is Macrocystis porifera, which is a bit of a mouthful. So giant kelp is just as easy to, it's just as well to call it that. And there are some really fun things that you may or may not know about giant kelp. It needs a lot of different conditions to be just right to grow at its best rate. And when everything is just right, it can grow up to 2 feet a day, which is ridiculous. So sunlight is one of the things that it needs, because even though it's an algae, it does photosynthesis to make food. So sunlight is important. So you can see in that tank that it's really bright, and that's because it's open to the sunlight on top, and it needs something to hold on to. So at the bottom of the specimens, it's hard to see on the screen, but it has root-like structures, which are the holdfasts, and that's exactly what they do. They hold tight, and we normally have a wave machine that's going that creates like the flow of water so that the algae can get nutrients through all of the different blades. So the biggest algae in there is called giant kelp. And then I know there are a bunch of other different kinds of algae in there as well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, especially if you live in California, but if you've seen seaweed on the beach before, you've probably seen giant kelp. There's different types of seaweed or algae that will wash up on shore, but most people's interaction or memories of giant kelp is it being washed up on a beach. So you might not be used to seeing it actually growing underwater like this, but this is a really special habitat in our coastal waters, because it houses over 800 different species of animals off the coast. So you can imagine that ecosystem of living and non-living components kind of interacting together. And having things like rocks are really important for kelp. Like you said, Nusrat, it's got to hold on to something. And when there's really strong storms, sometimes that holdfast is not holding on strong enough. And that's why we get giant kelp washed up on our beaches. It's kind of its way of replenishing itself. Just like when leaves fall off of a tree or branches, with strong storms, it will wash it up. But if there's more than the normal amount of strong storms, that's not good, because we don't want to see a ton of kelp washed up on the beaches. Omar said, oh my goodness, 2 feet a day. Wow. Yes. I think, Nusrat, that's probably one of my most favorite fun facts to tell people, especially kids. If you tell a kid, imagine if you woke up the next day and you were as tall as I was. Like if you tell somebody who's like half the height you are.
It's really mind-boggling.
It's mind-boggling, yeah. There's been scientists who have had cameras underwater and, have done like a 24-hour period of recording a piece of giant kelp growing, and it's amazing to see how quick it can grow just in 24 hours.
You don't even need to do time lapse. You can just see it grow.
Yeah. You don't need to speed it up. So Nusra, I kind of want to come back to you and ask you, the aquarium has been closed for a while, but you've been there a long time, and thinking back, just what is your favorite part about working at Birch Aquarium?
Yeah. So of course, right now we're all working from home, except our aquarists who are hard at work taking care of our animals. Um, I've been working at the aquarium for 9 years now, and I always start with saying that my favorite part about working at the aquarium is all the people. I get to interact with and work with a lot of really great people who love the ocean and care about the planet, and I learn a lot from them every single day. I also get to work with all our amazing and wonderful volunteers. Everybody has all their own different reasons for wanting to volunteer and be involved. And then on a day-to-day basis, I also get to interact with and meet guests from all over the world, which is another really meaningful and fun part of my day when I'm at the aquarium.
Yeah, I think working at an aquarium, you get visitors from all over. So it's so interesting to hear their stories. And just thinking about our kelp forest exhibit, for us, it's such a normal thing for us to see when we're at work on a day-to-day basis. But talking to people who've never seen a kelp forest, and giving them a chance to see this one is always so much fun. They always have so many questions because it quite literally looks like an underwater rainforest. It's full of animals, like a rainforest on land.
It really does, and it's really rich in diversity of animals that live in this habitat.
Definitely. So, maybe you kind of just answered that, but why would a kelp forest, or why is the kelp forest a special habitat to you, Nusrat? What makes it special?
What's really amazing, you talked about how people have noticed up to 800 different species who take advantage of this habitat. And it's kind of interesting to learn about which animals, use the kelp forest in what way. And a lot of times it's because, that's the animal's home. Maybe there's small crustaceans and smaller animals that live near the rocky bottom. But you can see, with our giant sea bass, there are even big animals, even gray whales that sometimes use that area as a resting spot that's maybe a little bit safer from predators, especially if gray whales are traveling with their babies. And so it's just amazing to me to think about all the diversity of animals that either live in the kelp forest or use it for camouflage, use it from, avoiding predators. I think that's one of the most amazing things about the kelp forest.
Definitely. It's it's not just a welcoming habitat to those who normally inhabit it. You get all sorts of other animals that definitely take advantage of it. And I know from the aquarium, because we have such a spectacular view off of our tide pool plaza. And if you've never been to Birch Aquarium, I highly recommend visit our website, look up a picture of Tide Pool Plaza, and you can see the view out there. We sometimes can see the kelp forest, because sometimes that kelp is growing so tall, it's touching the water's surface. So you kind of see that brown disruption on the water. And we've seen gray whales swimming through, and mothers with their calves coming up from Mexico. And Nusrat knows better than anyone, because volunteers are usually, one of their spots is out at Tide Pool Plaza, interpreting our tide pools. And when there's a whale sighting, they get on the radio and they call everyone in the aquarium to run out there and look.
And it's not only gray whales that we can spot, which is, really common during the migration season, but sometimes we have other really cool visitors too, like false killer whales, or, of course we have dolphins, and, sometimes the odd blue whale. You can sometimes tell, even though you don't know 100%, but it has a really tall blow. So it's a really, really amazing spot that we get to take advantage of every day when we work there.
Yeah, definitely. Lisa Campillo has a really great question, and it's, what can we do to help the kelp forest in La Jolla Cove in particular? I'm happy to answer this, and then Nusrat, if you have any,
go for it.
I'm in. Nusrat mentioned earlier, there is a network of marine protected areas that we have off of California's coast and other parts of the world, and that's sort of a growing movement with our local and state governments to protect these local waters. There's always been such a huge focus on protecting land, which is which is fantastic and is something that's so important. You know, if you've ever been to a national park and a protected area, you can really tell the impact it has on the land and the animals and the organisms you can find there. So that sort of action is now shifting to the ocean, which is really, really important. And so the kelp forest happens to be a coastal habitat, and you can imagine things like a rise in sea surface temperature or coastal storms are going to have a huge effect on kelp forest. So I would say, you know, what can you do locally to help, especially around La Jolla Cove if you're from San Diego, or if you're not from San Diego, is being able to be a part of that positive action to make sure that marine protected areas keep happening, you know, that we keep pushing for that in our local communities and on a nation level to create more marine protected areas and making sure that we're creating that space for animals and for habitats to continue to flourish. So I would say that's one big part is being a real positive movement and being a part of that action for marine protected areas. And another one is thinking about our climate. You know, a lot of people think that individual moves and actions might not have a huge impact, but collectively it does. So just really being conscious about your individual carbon footprint and thinking about what you do on a day-to-day basis that might help the environment over time. You know, a rise in sea surface temperature is not a good thing for kelp forests because they need to grow in cold, nutrient-rich water. And when our climate starts to change, it creates more storms, which again disrupts the local kelp forest. So that's what I would say is thinking about our climate and thinking about marine protected areas. If Nusrat, if you have anything to add, that would be great.
I would just say, you know, you were talking about how it's we all have a choice to make when it comes to you know, what we're consuming and what we're doing. And sometimes it can feel like one person, it's just one person, but you're really right that if more people do an action, it really has the potential to make an impact. And so personal choices, I would say they do matter. And so that's one of the biggest things that we as individuals can do. And then also just raising awareness with, you know, people we talk to, or, you know, through advocacy and making sure that we support the creation and the maintenance of marine protected areas.
Yeah, and coming up on June 8th is actually going to be World Oceans Day, which is a really special day for the aquarium. So if you're curious to learn more about what you can do to help, we'll definitely have a lot of online resources starting June 8th. We're going to be talking about marine protected areas that week. So I really highly encourage you guys to tune in then and be a part of that celebration with us. So Karen said her daughter Mia wants to know, what's the biggest whale you've seen? Nusrat, do you want to go first?
Sure. So since blue whales, correct me if I'm wrong, Delaney, are one of the biggest whales, the biggest whale, that has to be the biggest whale that I've seen. And I was fortunate enough to be able to spot one while at the tide pool plaza looking out on the water. So that's my sighting.
Yeah, I would have to say the same. I've had a chance to see a blue whale on our whale watching boat that we take out of San Diego Bay. And that was during when we would have summer whale watching was a program we tried for a bit. And, you know, I've been fortunate to see many other species of whales, including humpbacks and gray whales and minke whales. If you've never heard of a minke whale, they're more of a shy species. But seeing a blue whale, there's no second guessing because they're so large. You know that you're seeing the largest animal on Earth. It is fantastic. And so, yeah, I think seeing it from Tide Pool Plaza, you notice how tall that spout is out in the distance. And then being able to see it from a whale watching vessel was really exciting too. So I would say definitely some of my best memories has been whale watching. And the blue whale one definitely stands out. All right, so Nusrat, I got kind of a fun question for you here. And are there any myths about a kelp forest that you would like to bust today?
One really easy one that I can think of is that even though this algae, this giant kelp, it looks like a plant, it's really not a plant. It's in a kingdom, like in the protist kingdom. So you have animals, you have plants, And then you have this thing called protists, and algae is a part of that category of living things. So when I hear people referring to the algae as a plant, I can't be mad about it because it is plant-like. It does photosynthesis. It has these things that look like leaves. And then it might even have, this stuff that looks like roots on the bottom. So it kind of looks like a plant, and that's our familiar frame of reference. But it's really not a plant at all. It's an algae, which is a protist. So that's one thing that I learned about when I came to work at the aquarium.
Yeah, I think that's a really fun fact. And another fun fact to kind of just add on to that is a lot of people don't realize that they actually might eat giant kelp on a regular basis without knowing it or ingest it. So, Nusrat, did you brush your teeth today?
You know it.
I know I brushed my teeth today. If you brush your teeth, you actually ingested what we call alginate. So alginate is one of the many types of seaweeds that when it's processed, it's actually added to a lot of our food, health, and beauty products as a thickening agent. So if you were to brush your teeth and you put toothpaste on your toothbrush, but it wasn't pasty, it just sort of fell off because it was more liquidy, that would be a problem, especially for young kids who are, developing those motor skills. Toothpaste has that consistency a lot of times because it actually has algae in it. So it's a natural product that has a lot of benefits, but believe it or not, if you look in ingredients list, and I encourage you guys to do this today, go into your cabinets, your pantry, or look in your medicine cabinet, and if you see the word alginate, that means it's got algae in it, which is pretty cool. And there's many other words that it will be listed under as well. So I encourage you guys to do some investigating. But I know that's a fun fact about kelp too. It's just got so many uses, not just for animals, but for us as well. So we've got about 5 minutes or so left. So if you guys got more questions about our kelp exhibit, please feel free to ask us. And Nusrat, we've been talking about the kelp forest and how important it is and the animals. So what's one thing you feel like you do in your personal life that it helps conserve ocean? What's one thing that is a standout to you?
So continuing with the idea of, personal action, when you add it up, it makes a difference. One thing that's really important for me is, the really huge problem of plastic that ends up in the ocean. And so something that I work hard to do is to avoid using water that comes in single-use plastic bottles. We've probably all heard different statistics about how, we could reach the moon with, the number of plastic water bottles if we line them up, that we use in a particular period. And so I figure that's an easy way where I can make a choice. And sometimes people notice and, wonder, why am I saying no to that water? And I might just let them know that, I try to avoid using single-use plastic and, small things like that. But also, now in San Diego at most restaurants, you need to ask for a straw if you would like one. And a lot of times they'll have a paper straw or some other more sustainable option. But, those plastic straws, they are a real nuisance to animals in the ocean. And basically no good comes of them. So things like that, you can make choices. And then you also can sometimes have opportunity to talk to other people about it. So that's the sort of thing that I try to do to, make a direct impact on the well-being of the ocean.
Yeah, that's a really great way, just again, for individual choice. And there's so many great products out there now for carrying, having access to your own straw, whether that can be on like a keychain or you keep it in a bag. There's so many options now and they're just growing that I think it's becoming accessible to all people. Slowly but surely, it's becoming easier and easier to get a hold of these products that are reusable. So I think that's really, really great. I know I just purchased my own straw for my keychain finally. I had metal straws for a while, but metal straws kind of take up space and they cling around in your bag and they can get, so having one on my keychain has been great. Any of those small things, I definitely agree, Nusrat. It definitely helps. So, and it looks like Lisa said, we work to avoid creating plastic pollution in the ocean. So will Birch be doing something virtually similar to this on June 8th. I'd like to encourage my students to join in and support and interact. World Oceans Day this year, every year the theme changes and kind of the focus. And the big focus this year is about taking action with a focus on being able to create those marine protected areas and protecting coastal areas and just different parts of the ocean, whether that's coastal or it's out in the open ocean. But definitely, we're going to be talking about sustainability and choices you can make that'll contribute to that big picture. Plastics will definitely be a part of it. And we'll make sure, for young students, or even if you're older and you're an adult, we're going to have hopefully a lot of fun resources for you and activities just to get your mind thinking about how we can reuse and reduce our plastics, how we can have an impact on our oceans positively. So yes, Lisa, definitely tune in for June 8th for World Oceans Day for a lot of fun resources. All right, so we're about to wrap up. I do want to have one more question here from Devin, because his son is curious, what do you feed the leopard sharks at the aquarium? Ooh, so do you want to at least help us point out what the leopard sharks are in this exhibit? I feel like they've been swimming around.
Sure. Yeah, I'll start it off. We have usually 3 kinds of sharks in this exhibit that we're looking at. We have leopard sharks, which we find locally, like the other 2 species as well. And so swell sharks and horn sharks are the other 2 kinds that you'll find normally in this exhibit. And the leopard sharks have this really cool pattern over on the left side towards the middle. You see one of the leopard sharks swimming. It just went past. And they are sometimes easily spotted right from shore. Even if you're standing on the beach, you can sometimes see them when they're there during usually the hottest part of the year. And a really interesting thing that you can talk to people about to also kind of bust the myth about sharks being, scary, is that when you look at the leopard shark, their mouth is on the underside of their body. And so if you're wading or swimming, even if the leopard shark bumps into you, they can't do you any harm really, because their mouth is not built to, hurt anybody, from the front. And so that also gives you a clue about what they eat, because their mouth is on the underside. They're going to eat small animals that you find on the bottom. And so that's going to be small things like crustaceans and that sort of thing. And I don't know if you would have anything to add on what specifically we feed our sharks that are in our exhibit.
Yeah, well, like Nusrat said, they like to feed on crustaceans, smaller things that are going to fit into their mouth. So some of the food our husbandry team might feed them would be mackerel chopped up more into bite-sized pieces. They might feed them some of the California market squid, which is another huge source of food and protein for our animals at the aquarium. And when they do go into the exhibit to feed the animals, they might try to hand feed the sharks or even just disperse that food into the water. But I would say the mackerel, which is a popular bait fish, and the California market squid are probably 2 of the most popular choices of food for our leopard sharks, most definitely. So, all right. Well, we're just super happy that we have our Kelp Cam back, and we're really happy that all of you tuned in today. And a huge, huge thank you, Nusrat, for joining us and just sharing your passion for us and telling us about your really important job at the aquarium. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun to be on.
Awesome. And thanks to all of you. Please make sure to keep tuning in with us on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And definitely tune in the week of June 8th for World Oceans Day. We'll be celebrating all week long. And we're thinking about all of you. And we can't wait to open our doors and welcome all of you back and continue interacting with all of you, even on this online platform. So thank you guys so much and have a great day.